All right, so now we come to our first highlight of the day, which is our keynote address from the founder of the Natural Law Institute as well as the Proprietarian Institute. And
oh no, don't play. Bryan already played me up too much, made me nervous, all right? Let's not do any more.
Okay, well in that case, now that you said that, since this is Father's Day weekend, I think probably all of us would acknowledge that in a lot of ways, Curt is a father to us all.
Oh, that's sweet. That makes me happy.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Curt Doolittle.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so what am I going to cover with you? Brandon told you what we're about, so I don't have to say that. Essentially, Bryan laid out the strategy of what we're going to talk about. I actually took on the job here of saying, I want to show that we actually know what we're talking about. It's not just out of left field, but I really want to take what we call the pathological feminine off the objection list as much as I can. I think Bryan did a great job of saying, well, we took the pathological male off it as well as we could. Maybe too much because we can't punch each other in the face anymore, which appears to be civilizing function. And at least with slapping in the face certainly does. But what I want to do is take it and say, well, we can, with relative ease, we can actually suppress the pathological feminine. Does that mean we want to suppress the feminine? No, I don't want to suppress the feminine at all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about whose interests we serve, and the reason is, and both Bryan and Brandon touched on this, the fact that one of the problems that we will have, or we continue to have, is that the left converges and the right diverges, and this has to do with conformity versus conviction. And so if you are on the right, we fall into groups, and those groups tend to be fairly rigid, which we think of them as the fascist, the Christian, the classical liberal, the libertarian, and so on, the ethno-nationalist and the national and the civic nationalist. We have all these factions, and people are extremely passionate about it, which is a very male trait of saying I need to be right versus we need to be right. And so I'm going to touch on that a little bit and explain where that comes from. In other words, I'm not just going to cover the sex differences. I'm going to start with where our political differences come and come out from that. Then I'm going to say, what are those political and moral differences? What is the origin of human differences? And what's the cause and crisis of the age? And then later today, hopefully, we'll talk about how to surpass it. There are way too many slides in this presentation, right? Where's Francis go? There's way too many slides in this presentation, so I'm not going to hover on all of them. I've collected a bunch of things, which is a very shortened version of a much longer 1,000 set of slides. And so I'm just going to breeze through some ideas, but the point again is I want to get us off the fear of actually trying to regulate what we call, not women, but the female antisocial behavior, whether it's practiced by men or women. And when we say that, that's important, and the guys get on me all the time because I am not consistent about my saying it's not female antisocial behavior, it's feminine antisocial. There's Brad giving me thumbs up. Feminine antisocial behavior, because I work from neurology and I work from first principles, and so when I look at things, it starts out with sex differences. This behavior, all human differences basically begin there, and so when I start from that principle, people think we're just categorizing women. No, there's a third dimension of feminine cognition too, So there's a problem. So not only does the approach I took create this isolation of of the fact that it sounds like we're going after women instead of going after the evolutionary mandate that produced a psychological bias in human organisms, and for the reasons I've said, but also because if we want to suppress that in this current age when it's sort of gotten out of hand, we're going to have a resistance to it. So in other words, it's sort of like being Darwin, except Darwin had come earlier when the church was very fundamental, right? So we're sort of in that problem of bringing a message to market at a time that solves a harsh problem in an era where it's most likely to be rejected because the institutional capture that exists has been captured by the weaponization of the cognitively feminine.
The more it's needed, the more it hurts.
Sorry?
The more it's needed, the more it hurts.
Yeah, you know, I can't, people know this, I've said this before. I don't like the answer I came up with. I'm not happy about it. I really would like to say because I'm like a good little Christian Catholic boy, you know, and I'm like, I want things to be happy and moral and for us to get along, and I love women. I'm definitely a pedestal guy, right? And so to come up with this issue was really disheartening for me. And the only thing that happens is more disheartening to watch the intersexual, intersocial, familial relationships breaking down to the point where we can't even govern ourselves or grasp the world by the same levers. So I'm sort of torn in this. Well, I would not like to talk about it, but the problem is there, and I chose to solve hard problems, so now I got one. So I think Brandon covered this. We're a think tank. We're outside the academy. Could you do what we do in the academy? No. I'd get fired day 2. That's only because it took them a day to email each other. Right? Bryan, I love that you try, because you're good at giving credit. I mean, in every meeting, you give out credit. I mean, it's one of your great virtues and skills in presentation. But the way I look at it is, yeah, I sort of put that together, but it's more like a big society of mind thing where everybody brings pieces in, and I sort of see it as my job to make everything fit together. So thank you, but I just wanted to. So the many contributors here. So we've actually lost track. We've lost track of all the people who've contributed ideas, even the people who've contributed diagrams. Right? I mean, it's like we can't keep track of everybody. So we're more innovative than any other activist group I know of. We've produced more innovation ourselves in the past 10 years than, as far as I know, from all other organizations combined. We are what's called heterodox, which means we're outside of the mainstream, and I say we're actually heretics. That's how they consider us. The problem is if you go to say somebody, okay, here's what we do and here's our findings, and then on the flip side around and say, okay, what would you do about it? They're like, oh, that's really good. What you do about it? Yes, it would. But so we're always in this position of people develop opinions about us without actually understanding that we actually have everyone's interests in mind, and we will absolutely produce a better outcome for everyone, regardless of their class and political bias. So, and I think the next thing is that we've demonstrated, and I think this came across in our last conference, is that intellectual, what we would call conservative, which basically has come to mean people who care about the family. We've demonstrated that intellectual conservatism is possible. And for someone who's myself has been started writing book reviews and commentary for the college newspaper on the failures of conservative thought. I find this really rewarding, is that we actually have solutions. And I'm more libertarian than conservative actually, but now I am saying, well, that's great. My emotions are libertarian, but my mind is conservative. And so I guess is that an age thing? We just get older and we get wiser. So I don't I need to cover this? Brandon, you covered all this, right? So do I need to cover the Institute's mission really? I don't think so. So we're putting together the European Group Evolutionary Strategy and a bunch of reforms, and that'll restore us and bring us into place. But once you understand the strategy, you get over the problem of metaphysical presumption. Who asked me about that last night? Who asked me about metaphysics? Yes. What's your name again? Connor. So Connor asked me about, well, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, nobody knows what their group strategy is. So if you don't know what it is, you can't defend it. So one of the things that's great about having a Bible or a Torah or whatever is that you have your law encoded. And what having our Constitution is you have it encoded. But our Constitution is like a quarter of the encoding. Right? The rest of it is in the European group evolutionary strategy and understanding how close that is to the science, to the process of scientific discovery. So the second thing is people think we're advocating civil war. When I say, well, we're actually trying to overcome civil war. We're trying to make sure we'd like it to not happen. Seems like impossible at this point. But when I started out in 2004, I was pretty sure that this was going to happen. And it was about right on the timing. I was a little earlier than most people were later. And so we want to prevent it. And hopefully we can do that providing a solution. The problem to us providing the solution is that, as I've mentioned a few minutes ago, we have the answer, but it's an unpleasant answer. It's like Darwin saying, here's the problem of the biological sciences, and you don't want to hear it. So we're producing, I wrote this in like 2012, and it's maintained my 4 deliverables, the moral license, it's basically a repetition of the founders, right? You create a moral license, a solution to the crisis, a means of producing change, and a plan of transition. So we're trying to raise awareness and explain of why we're here. And we run our conferences to build these relationships and form local activists and to create a body of videos that we can distribute. In other words, the videos are the product of these. The rest of it's just we get to hang out together, which is really awesome.
That is in the product itself.
Huh?
That is
the product in itself, right? So I'm going to go over this. This is what we're producing. This is the scope of our work. You know that. With our new friend in education, now we need this one. We just need that one left. We got to make that one happen this year. So we all do different things, right? We all have different, like Brandon got up and said what he do. I do the technical stuff. Brandon and I do the technical stuff, and Brad helps me say technical stuff so the humans can understand it. Which is actually working. It's great. I think the audience know what evolutionary computation means, right? There's the universe evolves by evolutionary confrontation. What do first principles mean? I'm not going to go over these things because for this crowd and because this presentation is too long. But I want to put in the point here is that what we do is very technical. What I do is very technical, at least. And what you have to learn, what people, if you see the convergence of minds in our universe, is that people start to build pieces of understanding of this rather extensive framework, and they get to start to see the coherence of it and use it together. So I think that what people look at us for is they expect us to be producing an ideology or a philosophy. We're not. We produce a science from which we can then choose the good. So the problem again is that no criminal is willing to accept deprivation of his or her means of crime. And the problem is all humans justify their means of committing crime. And so one of the things we're having a problem with today is, of course, we're going to come up against the suppression of a very strong intuition in the cognitively feminine, just as we suppressed the strong intuition in the cognitively masculine. The difference is it's a lot easier to understand the suppression of that which is produced by force, and that is produced by sedition and seduction. This is where the presentation actually starts. Right? So what moral biases do we serve? We have, if we have a libertarian and conservative bias, a centrist bias, a center-left bias, we're probably going to make you happy. If you're an extreme left, we're probably going to offend you. Because what we're saying is the means by which you've exercised power over the past century is going to undermine civilization is going to go away. And if you're on the hard right, we'll help understand that it's very expression of the male, that you will not get in a position where you can impose the kind of authority you would want to over a family or a tribe, because this population is too large and too diverse and too complex. And so we can only do what we can do by a system, right? A system that can manage a large population, and that's going to be law. And so what we needed to do is produce law that was concrete enough to produce a system that would suppress the evolution of warfare that's happened over the past 175 years, 180 years. My point with the slide is we have to reach everybody. We can't reach just the people who sentimentally agree with us, which is most of us. We have to go out and bring, not even maybe we agree and then we can understand the work. Though the rest of the world doesn't need to understand the work. They need to understand only the solution to the work, the solution to the problem. All I was trying to get across here is that the first behavior we all begin with is acquisition. In other words, first principle is there anything that humans desire that cannot be, that humans desire or pursue or do that cannot be expressed as the ability to obtain something? In the positive, you want stuff and things and relationships and time and affection and rest. But even the things you want to avoid, you want to acquire the capacity or ability to avoid them. So everything can be expressed as acquisition. This is why property in the libertarian sense, or demonstrated interest in our sense, becomes the system of measurement. Because while we are different in our wants and needs at different points in time, we are similar in that we're all attempting to do the same thing with a similar portfolio of different assets we care about, but we just care about those assets more or less than one another. So, but I mean, this is the algorithm for life. You have to acquire to survive an inventory of resources by pursuing the greatest turns in the shortest time with the least effort, with the greatest degree of certainty and lowest risk competition with the competing alternatives. So the problem with most thinkers is they forgot this one. That's the libertarians. The second thing is that this is just physics, isn't it? That's just physics. It's just a return on energy. So this demonstrated behavior is rational, it's logical, it's empirical, it's a physical necessity, it's bound by the laws of the physical universe. So all human behavior can be described in these terms. And if you understand acquisition and demonstrated interests, that's the first thing you need to understand reciprocity. Once you understand reciprocity, then all you have to understand is truth, which is the means to negotiate reciprocity. That's the core of the work, right? That's the ethics of the work, is understanding those things. And you understand that that is a system of behavior that provides commensurability across all human behaviors. So we can, as someone asked me last night, you don't have to learn to talk in this language. You have to learn, if you need to, how to decompose what people are saying into causality. So I'm not going to go over demonstrated interest, but there are existential ones, right? There's your body, your opportunity, your limitations, your self-image, your kith, kin, and mates, your sustainable patterns of association. Then there's things you obtain, which is your personal property, your shareholder property, your interests, and your artificial interests. And then our common interests, which is genetic, human, informational. So in other words, what the 20th century left-wing movement and it's not just the left, it's the progressives and the left, they tried to do was bring us from a balance sheet measurement of our progress to an income statement measure of our progress. So what happens is, and I don't know if you guys have I've run a lot of companies, so I'm like, well, income statements are really great. You made a lot of money this month, but what happened to your balance sheet? Well, it's the same thing that happened to our culture. What Hayek added to economics was what we call informal capital. He added this stuff as capital, right? He said the things that are in your culture are assets, and they're really effing expensive to create. Right? And if in Western civilization, we require the greatest demand of individual responsibility for the mind, what comes out of your mouth, and your actions of all civilizations combined. And so because it's so demanding on us, this requires an extraordinary amount of self-regulation. And so he was saying that every time we self-regulate in that way, we're creating the norm and tradition of a behavioral capital that's so expensive we have no way of measuring it. What we can do is look at Mogadishu and say, okay, that's where it doesn't happen. This is, pick some low trust country. Pakistan, where it's, oh, okay, there's like really low trust. You can't do anything there. You need a military junta to run the place. You have Ukraine and Russia would be a great example. The Congo. Oh God, don't give me. That was the one we should have started with. All right, and so you get up to where you get up to the Danes and the Danes and the Japanese, right? Right. Well, there's a price for the two sides of the coin between the Germanics and the Japanese. And the two sides of the coin is their hyperconformity makes them the most tolerant of what we would consider a socialist economy. It comes at the price, though, of innovation. Whereas in our country, we pay the price of the social stress and tolerance for nonconformity in order to obtain innovation, adaptation, and creativity. So there's a trade-off, and we all have to make those trade-offs with different countries make those. When we're in our current state of, oh my God, what the hell is going on here, then Japan seems really attractive. But if we were in this Japan state of attractiveness and we needed to be innovative and competitive, we would look at the Germanic countries and say we need to be able to do that. So let me finish. So what the classical liberals did is they created the application of calculus to economics, which is what got marginalism. Everybody know what marginalism is? Well, marginalism is the idea that the thing is different in value to you and me on one hand, and the second thing is that if I have 100 bags of flour, the first bag doesn't mean that much to me, but the last bag, which is the one I could live on, means a lot to me. So that's marginal difference between the value of things. So they created calculus to create marginalism, which created modern economics. Hayek came along and he said, okay, that's great for assets, but now we have to talk about informal capital. And when I came along and says, now we got to talk about informational capital, which is what comes out of our mouths. And so that's the sequence of the evolution of how I approach what we've done with economic theory. And if you haven't been in the academy at all, you know that there's a thing called economic imperialism. I don't know if you've heard this. And the social sciences, it's basically economics has replaced all the social sciences. And well, they're not social sciences anymore. They're means to get grants for doing nothing. Okay. So now we have the demonstrated interests. What's our approach to demonstrated interests? So this is work by John Haidt, and what he's done is he said we looked at the moral foundations. So sort of think of it as the big five in personality. The moral foundations are the same equivalent in moral attributions. So what he came along and said is, okay, this is what difference is that the very liberals are cognitively feminine and they're moral specialists, right? They only care about this. Well, and I'm going to cover why. And then conservatives are moral generalists. We weigh everything. Libertarians are sort of in the middle. This is too much off. It doesn't have a good here because these would be a little closer. But the libertarians, are they in group? Well, I was, but not too many of them. Open borders libertarianism. What about authority? Oh no, they don't want any authority, right? And do they do purity? No. Conservatives do purity. And purity is what makes us all. One of the things that makes conservative factions differ is because we purity spiral. And so that's what prevents us from getting the Christians and the classical liberals and the fascists. I realize most of us are probably considered fascists by the mainstream. I mean, we actually want laws that require people to be moral. We must be fascists, right? But the big difference in conservatives is the sense of purity. In other words, a lot of us have a heavy disgust response. We find things disgusting, offensive, impure, contagious, potentially poisonous to the community. But let's see where that might be a very physical thing to the left. In other words, it has no meaning. We would see what their attempts at self-satisfaction are. In other words, satisfaction regardless of consequences. We would see that as an impurity. And so the big thing between us is not only that we have more of this bias and that they have more of that bias, and libertarians are more in they're more specialized in reciprocity, fairness, but they don't want to pay the cost of commons. What do you want to say?
Well, Haidt, obviously, because of his own biases, doesn't see. Haidt, because of his own biases, just doesn't see that leftists have their own ideological in-group. They have their own
No, of course,
authorities
yes.
and their own ideological purity.
Right, so they create a social, what you're saying is we create a genetic in-group and cultural in-group, and they create a social in-group.
Yes. So it's not that they lack those values, they're sort of inverted.
Okay, so let me rephrase that, then you're right. So what happens is that the way they consider in-group, the questions used in the survey to test in-group were the masculine version of in-group, right? And so they could, that allowed them to separate the two. That was very, yes, sir. You say smart things, Martin.
Well, I assume there's a reason you keep me around.
So, all right, so now we said, okay, there's a moral difference between these groups, but why? And it turns out that you can look at these things as three axes of causality, right? The increasing demand for care, right? The increasing demand for groupishness, and the increasing demand for liberty. But interesting, there's people, it's okay if everybody's in here. But if you get people who move out to the edges, what you get is alienation of the other two. So whenever you're in this sort of mainstream here, you can accommodate everybody. But when you get to specialize, you now can't accommodate other people. Now, now if you were to look at personalities, I don't think I didn't add this slide into this because I've already got too many as it is. So when you look at personalities, they actually form by these three core differences, but they look at it differently in personality. It's called personality clusters. So we have the big 5 personality differences, but people tend to cluster. Those clusters also represent these things, right? You know what they are? The feminine, the masculine, and the ascendant male. Teenagers, adults, and women. That's what the personalities words are. So this basic understanding shows up in our moral preferences. It shows up in our moral preferences, but it also shows up in our personality types. So what I want to get across here, because that's the reason I showed you this demonstrated interests, is I took John Haidt's work and I said, well, it's just property allocations. I said, what demonstrated interests are people biased towards? And what they're biased towards is empathy and care harm is a consumption bias, right? So they're looking for consumption, and it's consumption in time. What is the universal bias? Almost everybody has a bias towards some side of fairness cheating. It's just that there's a very big difference between what we consider fairness and cheating if you can make the excuse that I'm a dependent or I'm oppressed. So why would you create a dependent narrative and an oppressed narrative? To cheat. Right? And so people are really good at justification. I didn't do lying in this thing because we'd be here for 2 hours. But the skill people have at lying to get away with this is unbelievable. And I went back to this diagram and I said, what are the libertarians doing? They're trying to not pay for the commons. What are these guys trying to do? They're trying to get people to pay for the commons. What are these people trying to do? They don't want to pay for shit. And so what's weird is that, so you're following me and I'm like, people think, like this sounds like it's all correlative, right? But we're going to get to the point where like, no, it's neuroscience, it's just neurology, it's the way the brain is organized. And so you get a productivity bias. Well, why would a young man want to be productive? Women, chicks, right? Chicks want consumption. Ascendant males want be able to direct resources to mating. And established men want to be able to direct resources to maintaining capital. Right? So the consistency of all these behaviors, this we call the ternary logic, right? It starts with physics and it gets to here. It goes all the way through all our behavior. It's a really simple logic. And all human behavior is braced in these categories. Now, are all of us extraordinarily complex variations on these themes? Well, of course. But in general, when you look at the macro explanation of our differences, that macro explanation of our differences is going to come out with this macro distribution. That's why voting looks like it does. I think I already covered this, right? Care, harm for others, protecting them from harm.
Yes.
Reciprocity, treating justice, treating others, liberty, oppression versus common interest. So I covered this already. Oh, I should add in, this is taboos. Who has more taboos and about what? So what do libertarians have taboos about? What do leftists have taboos about? And what do the conservatives have taboos about?
We've got taboos about talking about taboos.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the left has a taboo against judgment.
They have a taboo against responsibility.
Everything, yeah.
We have a taboo against irresponsibility, and they say, "Look, I want to." In the middle, libertarians like, "I need enough. I only want to pay for enough responsibility that I get laid." So if we scale these behaviors up, consumption, trade, and capitalization, what we get is consumption and what we call religion. Now remember, in our organization, religion is the production of mindfulness in a population that allows the eradication of conflict and the maximization of in-group altruism, right? So this is the libertarian, or trade, reciprocity in the individual, and this is forced state duty in the collective. And so we end up with this expression. Now, how many people have seen our triangles? Right? So we have this from the quantum background up to the difference in group evolutionary strategies. This is just a simple one. And we see it, that manifesting in the distribution of political biases. And this is why we use the triangle, not the square like the Nolan chart, because it's wrong. Because there's I said, why is there a vacant quadrant on a chart of politics? There's nothing there. Well, that's because there isn't anything there. All right. I like this one as communism versus Darwinism, right? Absolutism versus republicanism, and individualism versus totalitarianism. So our democracies are in here. Why is that? Well, it's a compromise position.
So where would the Natural Law Institute chart on this triangle? Where'd you place it?
We produce what's true, right? And then we leave open for others to decide how they want to use the truth. All we're saying is, if you want to be over here, don't lie about the consequences. You are going to pay for it. If you're over here, go ahead, but you're going to pay for the consequences. If you're going over here, don't go ahead, but you're going to pay for the consequences. So if I would to say what I would recommend the same shit everybody else does, which is basically to create a republic. I would probably be around here somewhere.
Also, Curt, it's also important, I think, to mention that in a society like ours, where people are alienated from one another and don't have communal bonds, our politics serve as a badge of our identity,
yes,
so that we can identify one another.
Yeah.
So that's why people are polarized to some degree, because they have to know, are you also prioritizing care to the degree that I do? Yeah. Do you prioritize sanctity to the degree that I do? Well, so as far as this chart goes, all of them can actually cooperate together with their various instincts, but the location of the government is something that you're arguing for would in a sense transcend this chart, because the government would...
I don't know if that's true. I would say that the point is that there are interests, and you have to produce a market for the reconciliation of differences.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yes,
yes.
I'm trying to get you to say that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And not say where the government would be, but rather say we're creating a market to adjudicate the differences.
Right, you're trying to say that, and the other thing is that we're not. One of the things that people try to do, and they've tried to do this throughout political history, is create a permanent ideal. One of the things we do is we say, okay, there's a period of windfall, right? There's a period of growth, and there's a period of stress. And your government has to be able to adapt to those conditions while restoring the centrality once the crisis is passed. Whether it's a crisis of, look what happened when they found the silver mines in Athens. They spent the goddamn thing into war. They killed themselves with money. What happened to the Spanish? They killed themselves with money. Right? So if you want to say, okay, well, what happened to the Chinese communists? They killed more people than any other group in history in a shorter period of time than any other time in history. Right? We can't get into libertarians because no one's stupid enough to believe them enough to do it.
Would you say that right now we're kind of doing the same thing? We're spending ourselves into oblivion?
Well,
On that path, at least.
well, no. The answer is obviously yes. I think as one of the guys who was in the Austrian economics world, and I still am, because Austrian economics is science. Chicago economics of Milton Friedman, it's insurance, right, of your economic strategy. And Keynesian economics was supposed to be crisis management, but now it's become for the same kind of expansion that ever happened. And so when you look at this thing, you have, I'm an Austrian, and we said the business cycle isn't just a business cycle. It's a civilizational cycle, like every other historian has said. And what's going to happen is you can now keep kicking the can down the road, because you will eventually exhaust the behavior of the population. It's important. It's exhausting the behavior of the population. And so they're throwing this down there, and then you create a situation that's irrecoverable. Now, how many guys, a lot of us come from libertarianism, so a lot of us have economic and financial knowledge. I mean, you get Bryan going here on money in a minute. And so if you have a lot of financial understanding, a lot of economic understanding. But I mean, look how many civilizations have done this same stupid thing in the past and crashed and burned because of it. Now, the difference is we're actually aware of it, and we're still doing it. And the reason we are is because we have a democratic government. You can have a democratic government if it's bound enough by law that it can't do stupid things. But if you have the progressive era, and you have the post-war promise of infinite wealth and the pre-war promise of continuous growth, what you end up with is betting on continuous growth. What has happened to growth? Well, it's flattened in the 70s, right? And what's happened to reproduction? So you think there's going to be Social Security in the future? Not going to happen. Because what happened before is not only did people didn't save for their retirement, right? So what happened? They didn't save for the socialization, so they spent it, right? Then they spent it and they created debt. So they spent what they had, they created debt, and now they've created intergenerational debt. And the problem we have is there's no more capital. That's genetic, behavioral capital. And there's a thing called advantage cap, which means your technology, both institutional and economic and scientific and technological, that's not there anymore. And so we don't have those advantages. And instead of being 15% of the world's population, I don't know where we are now.
8 to 10.
Yeah, so we're down in there. We don't have the economic demographic advantage. We've still got an IQ advantage, and thankfully our institutions haven't fully collapsed yet. So we do have the best property defense, which means that we're a place you can go to, you can bring your money if you're afraid, which is why I said don't worry about the dollar, because people are going to fly to it. So my answer your question. So am I answering your question?
I think we're on the right track.
All right. So we're not going to get out of this without suffering. Everybody's just saying, which suffering are we going to have? The benevolent guys say it's going to be somewhere around a 10-year, like the 70s, which I lived through them. It sucked. Then we could have a Japan here, which lasts 30 years. Right? We could have it worse than that. We could have a 70-year period. So nobody knows. We could have a period of inflation and slow growth, almost certainly. But we could actually have a deflationary period. And so, I've been saying, if we don't fix this problem, forget that the average Brit is poorer than the average person in Alabama, which is our poorest state. Outside of the city of London, England's a poor country. So if you say, do you want to go live like that? Do you want to live in a little house like that where you're worried about the price of heat every day, and nickel and diamond, and you're being taxed to death on top of it, so that you can claim one victory is that you have socialized health care? It's not good for them. So what causes these behaviors that we're seeing? And there's dimensions of human differences. First is neoteny, which produces racial differences. I'm sorry if that offends somebody, but the difference between the races as we went outside of Africa is what's called inside Africa, and then outside of Africa is called domestication syndrome or neotenic evolution, which is the exchange of a big brain, like think of a wolf, right? A big brain and really a persistent and aggressive behavior for a puppy, which is really friendly, open, and impersistent behavior. Like a wolf will not give up and your dog will. I mean, I could throw my dog's toy, and if he thinks I'm screwing with him, the third time he's going to say, go to hell, right? Right? But the wolf, he'll stay on you forever. So we're trading domestication syndrome. So you get neotenous functions, which is a retention of childhood features. This is why we look the way we do and why Asians look the way they do. The Asians are the most neotenous. We're next. The South Eurasians, which is west of North Africa over to the eastern borders of India, they're the next, and Africans are the next. Even inside of Africa, there's the old Africans, which are like the San and those people, and the newer Africans. So we have this function of neoteny. So what happens really, if you want to say we're teaching impulsivity and aggression for the ability to self-audit. And so the second thing you get out of it is you get IQ, because you get more developmental ability to run neurons. So what we get is you get smarter populations the further they get away and into the stress of the cold and into fixed regions where they're all dependent upon each other for hyper adaptation and survival in hostile environments. The second thing is really fascinating. It's that you can sort of develop your brain front to back, right? This is your vision and your motor coordination, your spatial perception, etc., your organization of your body in relation to your goals, and whatever your social processes and whatever you're focusing on, right? What's holding your attention. So your brain develops in that order. We see it in our children, right? They develop self-regulation last. They develop how to move around and you love baby faces that make these weird, right? They're trying to make their faces work correctly. So you develop that stuff, and you work in this sort of order. Now, what's interesting is in that developmental order, you get people, I like to use the Keanu Reeves example, who's an athlete. If you listen to the guy talk, he can't make a 3-word sentence, right? What he does is body language. So he's heavily dominant in his motor cortex. Okay, I'm going to come after you now. Someone like Noah is in his verbal cortex. And so what's happening is you sort of develop a tendency of a resting point somewhere. There are some, this really creeps me out, but there are some people that are really into using their lips on things and tasting them, and they're really stuck back in here somewhere as a dominant structure. So you get this back to front cortical bias. What?
The lip.
I don't know. I haven't looked. I don't. I'm so disgusted by it. I don't want to go research what it's called. The second thing is that, and you notice this with Amerindians, which I did. I was very in love with a woman named Amanda, and she's half Cree and half Ukrainian, and very beautiful one, far beyond my regular. I caught that one outside of my normal. How do you call it? Beyond your reach or something like that, out of my league. And Amanda says, no, you understand how my people think. And so she made me meet some of these people. Their awake state is a lot closer to our daydream or dream state. And so they live much more in contact with their feelings. So just like Keanu Reeves can live in his physical state as the dominant function, and I would live in the abstract state, spatial state is my dominant function. Some people live in the social state as their dominant function. And so you sort of look at this developmental arc. There's also the capacity to live in the consciousness spectrum. So I can be like, I'm a nerd. Like if I want to focus on something, you will have to shake me to get me out of it, right? And so, but other people, they live in the world of perception and feelings. And so we call this living in the moment and experiencing, or living in your head, right, which is thought. There's a spectrum there. So that's another dimension that people live in. We have the sex bias, which is largely a hemispheric bias. I love talking about the neurology of this, so I won't do it because we'll be I'll only cover it a little bit. Then there's a developmental bias, which is that, frankly, some of us are put together better than others. And that's partly due to anything that happens in utero and early adulthood. But if you look at the brains of babies, there's no neural connectivity in there. It has to be developed. But by the time you're 2, it's like, oh, holy God, wow, there's a lot there. By the time you're 4, it's like, holy shit, that's like a forest, a dense forest, where that was like a green field. And then, of course, you have the problem of mutational load. Unfortunately, the problem with this thing is it's most complex thing we know of in the universe. And there are around 30 chemicals that sit on the end of an axon, and they go to find out whatever other chemical they're trying to find, trying to wire your brain together. And then there's this whole ecology in your head, right? I mean, there's so many, there's all these chemicals and whatever, and they all communicate with each other. Some stimulate neural growth, some inhibit it. And so then you get some people with more and better myelination, which is sort of like a repeater on a network, right? I mean, it keeps the transaction costs down. And then some of us have way more white matter, women, so they can think about more shit at the same time that makes us men crazy that we can't believe it. And then you have the more things like gray matter in the men, which means we can compute really fast, really complex shit in an emergency. And so you get this sort of, you get this difference. So you have these variations. All of us are a variation between the masculine and feminine. And then you have this genetic load, which means accumulated defects. I like genetic load better than mutational load, but in the industry they use both terms. And what it means is you've just accumulated enough noise in your genome that for some reason, because this is really complicated up there. I mean, it's unbelievable. As you've created enough in there so that your developmental bias is either is inhibited in some way or not. And that's where you get basically your differences in demonstrated personality and differences in intelligence, more particularly intelligence. So those are dimensions of human differences. Now, that's actually it. The most important one we're going to talk about in our work today. So I want to get across this. I really don't like McGilchrist, because he's got an agenda, right? He's not really necessarily a leftist, but he's got this Christian thing in him. He's trying to push into the sciences, and he calls this the master and the emissary. There's no idea like that in evolutionary history. It's, I need to keep aware of the environment and produce risks. I need to focus on what I'm trying to kill. So language is over here. Why? Continuous recursive disambiguation, continuous recursive disambiguation. I got to kill something. And this is the prey, which is continuous awareness. What is that world? They're worried about empathy. They're worried about spatial perception. They're worried about what's around them, what the resources are, what threats they are. And so, is this division really that concrete? No. If this part of your brain on either side, right here, this green, is trying to say, where the hell is something in space? Right? What is it and where is it? This part takes generally the backgrounds and the spaces and things and the relative position. And this part over here looks at objects. Right? It looks like what is this thing compared to other things? So it's a level of precision. From the center of the back of your brain, now back here is the visual cortex. It radiates like a target, like little circles around circles. And this is just increasing generalization as you grow out from the outside. But the primary difference I want to get out here is that male and female differences are actually caused by this. Why? Why would that happen? Well, you see that split down the middle? It's called bilateralization. So when brains first developed in things like worms, don't you love knowing you evolved from a worm? All right, when you're in a worm, they don't have a side. They just have a lump. But for some reason, a couple of miracles happened in history. One of which is that we needed to move, and that gave us limbs, and we needed to coordinate them. So the body split in half, doubled over. You got the ability to have limbs, and with it, you can't wade into the problem of how the hell do I coordinate two brains? And so there's a huge bundle of wires that connect the two hemispheres called the corpus callosum. And really, that job there is to coordinate the two hemispheres. And so next thing is, okay, now I've coordinated the hemispheres because everything evolved from movement. So everything in our brains is basically an evolution of the thing of movement. When those things two happen, who's in charge? Right? Who's in charge? Who decides? Now, generally, one side of the brain is ahead of the other, right? And the brain, and one side takes dominance over the other. And the right side of your brain deals with the left side of your body, right? It's because don't ask me. There's two things that are really weird to me. That and why your eyes have to cross over. Why does this side go over here? And why does this guy go over here? Come on, couldn't you figure that out? There's a vagus nerve in your body. In order to do that, it goes way down here so it can come back to here. What?
Yeah, this is kind of tripping me out the more you explain it.
Yeah, right. So if you get it, it really makes it really easy to understand that neurons that fire together wire together. And if you make a minor bias in the organization of those wires, you get a macro difference in behavior. So all this side does, it's biased toward right? And and the way I tell people, think about it as in time. They're biased to in time, prey, and over time, predator. And so when you look at that as I got to have a division of labor, that division of labor tended to be time, right, and concern. And so that's how the division of labor came up, and the corpus callosum connects the two and lets them decide together, and then you get to the front of your head, which is all these conflicting ideas, like, what do I do now, right? I would say that's why it gave me, this understanding made me much more appreciative of, like, well, they're women. You know what's going on in there? You don't want any part of it. Be forgiving. Is that true? It's true, right?
It is.
And then you get this thing where you're like, what are you doing? I'm thinking of nothing. No, what are you thinking about? No, literally, I'm a guy. I'm thinking of nothing. Right? It's not a problem. This is what you get out of blah, 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 blah with other girls. We get out of like, watching the fire burn.
Conserving energy. I don't need to spend this right now.
So, and of course, the classical example is men live in boxes. We open a box, that's where we are. We close the box, right? You know where women are? They're like, you ever had those people, windows go mad on you? You'd open up 1 million windows on a website because it's all these windows pop up because you probably don't remember that anymore. So you get into this dimorphism, which is really visible in the neural circuitry. So you can see this in the male, right, is that this is all longitudinal, speed. And you see the female, it's all lateral, volume. Right? And so you can see this in the processing. We can actually tell now with really clear, we can tell your sex, race, and class from monitoring your brain and activity. So this is like, we have most connections, we go from back to front fast, right? The front or front to back. We focus in the hemisphere, individual hemispheres, we compartmentalize. You know what makes someone autistic? Compartmentalization. You know what makes someone solipsistic or psychotic? Failure of compartmentalization. So this accounts for the better spatial and motor skills. It's like lean, mean machine. I've got to worry. The women are rows, and the problem is women don't have children now. But if you have children by that, and through most of her history, you're a girl, you're taking care of other children by the time you're 5, right? You're just always doing this, right? And then you're growing up, and you've got all this other children working together and taking care of, right? So your brain is evolved as a woman is to what are they doing, what are they thinking, what trouble could get they into, right? Now, what happens if you don't have the cognitive burden?
You'll seek it.
You'll seek it. So how do you seek it? Attention. What's the greatest stimulation the human being can have? When I'm talking to you and you're talking to me and we're interested, that's the greatest activity you're going to get out of a brain ever. So what are women doing? They're seeking the thing with attention and hypergaming and all this shit. They're seeking the thing that is not being provided by, it's sort of like telling a man don't exercise.
Yeah, they got like 10 cats.
Yeah, because they need to put it to work. Because what makes the brain feel good? What makes you feel good? And it's like the thing we talked about, stress versus suffering. We're all happiest at the limit of our capacity to not fail. And so if you take a person, you want to be fulfilled, that's what it means. It's you want to be in the position of where you're going to fail. So what are guys doing with video games? They're doing the same thing. Many more neural collections go side to side across both hemispheres of the brain. This is why women are better at verbal skills and intuitive inabilities. So I just say think of it as time. Men have to be really, really fast and really, really essential, but women don't. They need to keep track of a lot of shit. I always wonder, my wife knows what's in the fridge. How could that happen? So you see this dimorphism in a lot of places. This doesn't. I don't really want to get into this, but you can see how testosterone decreases gray matter value and it strengthens the white matter pathway, etc. But the one I care about is this one, which is an axon, and these are synapses. That's not right. That should be a dendrite, isn't it? So the point is, as you see, the females have them out here, and the males have them here. What's the difference? Speed. Less, faster. More, slower. So it's not, what bothers me most is this lie we were told that we're the same and we're equal. At clerical work, women are better than men were. We've known for centuries that women are better with adding up numbers because men just get tired of it. We have these, this is where the gender dimorphism comes up. I'm not going to put this up there. I'll probably get the whole video burned just for putting this slide up there. But this is an example where the gender dimorphism, the sexual incentive reward system, is in a very sophisticated, complex, little dense place that can be subject to stresses. It's like, how do you stress out your motor cortex? It's hard. You got to really screw something up. But down in here, where all these are little nuclei, right? They're little nuclei, and they're really dense, filled with neurons. You get a chemical variation in there or something, which when we're living in a world where I'm not a health nut, but the amount of things that are in our bodies that shouldn't be, right? It's really, so you get these really differences. So this is a heterosexual man versus a homosexual man, for example. So it's not like we don't know these things. Right? This is what bothers me, the attempt at social construction when these reasons are obvious. I don't want to say it's a genetic defect, but it's a genetic defect amplified by a behavioral defect. And so I think I've already covered this. We're hardwired for systems and power and politics and facts, and women are for empathy, relationships, both sides are used, and they're available for values. You have to think, it's better to think of it the way I'm going to get to this right now, which is, I thought I had it quickly. It's again better to think it of the brains are all using the same amount of energy. They only have so much energy to work with. So how are you going to divide that energy in order to obtain the needs of the two sexes? Right? You divide the energy by saying, well, I'm going to make it do more slower and less faster, right? That's what it's going to do. So it's time. When I say economics is reducible to time, that's what I'm getting at. So you end up with these differences in cognition. This thing is legendary now, which is the sex differences, masculine, feminine, masculine, lateral, longitudinal, in time, over time, direct versus abstract, empathizing, systematizing, experience versus, it's again, in time, over time, experience versus consequences, hyper-consuming versus capitalizing, devotion versus loyalty. This is the one that's ruining marriages. Women are only devoted in time, while men are loyal over time. So that's unless you can create common interests over time, you can't keep a marriage together. You have women use special pleading and asymmetric ethics, where men use consistency and symmetric ethics. We have status by consumption without responsibility for it, with status by capitalizing with responsibility for it. We have the result is irresponsibility for the commons and responsibility for the commons. Why? Because it's risky to be responsible for the commons. So why do guys capitalize and produce commons? In order to attract women. Because we can tolerate the risk. Can women? It's too dangerous. Women are catty and they're mean and they're really. One of the things I learned is I thought it was overstated, but when you learn women's warfare is freaking scary, it's ruthless. The difference is men fight to establish position. Women fight to kill.
Yes. And they'll kill to 7 generations. Everything out.
That's why they hold grudges for like
Yes.
Well,
men
so
fight for resolution.
we fight for resolution, right? We're just because we need to maintain our numbers.
I can't kill you, I might eat you tomorrow.
So you get psychotic versus autistic in the bad side. You get prey submission versus predator dominance. You get the herd behavior versus pack behavior, global versus national behavior, dysgenic reproduction plus over eugenic reproduction, devolutionary over evolutionary, and left parasitic versus right productive. So you get these, and this one's important because I'm trying to tie it back to that earlier diagram. We're like, well, it's just how we interpret capital, and for these reasons. So really, this is what I try. It's like I said, I reduced civilization to this shirt. So what you do is all you have to understand is the reduction is the feminine search for hyperconsumption, dependency, and evasion of responsibility for the commons because of the risk of potential for conflict, and the masculine search for capitalization, freedom, responsibility for the commons regardless of the risk for potential conflict. Because we need to bait women with stuff. We get to build nests, right? That's a bad example, but birds build nests to get chicks. That's what we do. We build capital. Once you understand this, that's why I'm like, wow, being rich gets me a lot more dates. Once you understand this difference, the moral biases are all obvious. So I close up with another quote here. There's no aspect of the left, no matter what disposition, that is not the use of lying and deception for the purpose of evading all responsibility for self, others, and the commons by extracting or stealing from those who are productive. So the woke personality is the extreme example. You are with the psychological illness, disease, or defecate. In other words, the actual truth is they're not healthy in the mind. So so in the female you get borderline personality disorder and histrionic. This is what we think of as Karens, right? And this is what we think of the undermining crazy chick that's sleeping around and else. And then of course you get the male antisocial behavior, which is sociopathy and psychopathy, and the narcissistic personality disorder. I don't like this term because it's so overused, and almost none of the people they're causing it are being narcissistic, they're being practical. So note the sex differences in attention, with the female exaggerated demand for attention expressing externally, and the male expressing internally. Right? What is broken in the brain and mind's processing of information requires attention. The rough estimates of the population are that 30% of the female population is histrionic, and 20% of the male population is antisocial. So here's the real answer. Like I said, your brain has only so much energy, so you get empathizing in time and systematizing over time. You ever hear the guys go, well, just do that, and the woman says, are you crazy? It's a child. Right? That's the inability to scale down systematizing. Right? That's the over-application of the general to the specific. Have you ever had a woman say, but we need to care about them? And you're like, are you crazy? They hate us. Right? Okay, so the problem is as information processing systems, these things have domains of competency. And this is why we have this problem, is that without training, this doesn't move this way. Without training, this doesn't move this way. The worst is we might want to move this way because we're morally homogenous in the conservatives, but the women, they don't want to move that way. Because what does that mean? I can't rely on what I feel. So the good is that it's empathizing few in time now versus systematizing many over time later. But the bad is specifics can't generalize into systems. In other words, you can't apply empathy to a polity, just like you can't apply the economics of the family to the state, which is really interesting. Like the state, if you look at the economics of a family, the government, the state works by the exact opposite means. One of the things we're really aware of in economics is economic knowledge doesn't generalize. If you're really good at, say, labor economics, and I'm really good at political economy, we're going to be wrong about everything the other guy says. No, what we think. Because the knowledge of a particular is so much counterintuitive because of the complexity. So the problem with you is it's like having a logical argument with women, and they're like, well, that drives us nuts. But they're trying to have an emotional argument with us, and it drives them nuts, right? I mean, so what you do is you have to listen to each other, and of course I'm autistic, so I depend on women for being semi-human. So so I listen, and so what we end up with is that we have hate's moral foundation expressed as property rights. So you have harm, care, proportionality, cheating, what assets there are, what prohibition there are, and what strategy the sexes take, right? You have community property, which is the concentration of capital. These two things, right? What these prohibitions are, how they're applied by the different groups. And then purity sanctity, which is the prohibition on the risks that are to the coherence of the group, the weakening the group, and you have the libertarian, authoritarian, and socialist, masculine and female. So the point I was trying to make is that there's this incredible coherence between the organization of brain, the needs of the brain, and the demonstrated behavior at all levels of the society, whether it be antisocial behavior or pro-social behavior. And we've looked at it as a computational problem of the division of labor in time. So what we try to do is say, well, we used to have a division of roles that made pretty much sense, but right now we're trying to make them men. And the reason men are better parents is because they get remarried, and the women or the single divorced fathers are better parents as they get remarried. And the reason divorced women are less good parents and produce wild, scary outcomes is because they don't get remarried. And as someone who has a large number of children who aren't mine in my what do you call it, background, legacy, something like that. Well, no, I mean I had relationships with women who were divorced. I'm not one of those guys that have a problem with that. The thing you have to realize is you're never going to have the kind of first period relationship in that marriage that you would have had in your own, and it's going to be almost impossible to bring it about except with a very stable woman. So, I want to close with this point here, is that most of us are a lumpy mix. There's average sex difference behavior, often there's overlap. Most of us are some blend. I think I'm trying to think of who I can refer to here. I can't think of anything. Most of us are some blend, and that you only get extremes. An autistic is an extreme male brain. A psychotic is an extreme female brain. Most of us are not either autistic or psychotic. We're some mix of the two. Some of us can be more masculine in thought and some more feminine thought, more masculine in evaluation and more feminine evaluation. The majority of the population is an overlap in the two. What you do find in my research is that cognitive differences remain the same even if valuative differences vary greatly. What that means is women will always be verbal and pictorial and better at it, and men will always be rotational, spatial rotational, and they model things in time, and they will always be operational in their thinking. So this is why this is really the reason why they're all primary thinkers at the extremes who create innovations in theory are all male, because it involves systematizing. Whereas you get Werrell and Vos Savant, who's the smartest woman that we know of, and I can't doubt. I could never keep up with her. Her ability to do logic puzzles is extraordinary. So I think I've made this point here. The point I'm trying to get to is that that this division of labor. Think of it this way. You know that triangles, right? Think of that as opportunities. The individual for individual extreme identification of opportunity. The masculine established male identification of opportunity, and the feminine identification of opportunity. What you're looking for is anywhere in there is a compromise that allows the satisfaction of wants between anyone inside that triangle that increases the size of the triangle. So the size of the triangle, but determined by how much feminine or masculine or libertarian we can find, right? No matter what we do, we're increasing the surface area of computability of time and space. Is that too nerdy, or does that make sense? The computational ability to research and develop the world as a human species, as a collective, think of it as computing system. The fact that we're different, and the more different we are, yet we still find reconciliation, compromise, and cooperation, means that we are discovering more opportunities across more time and space for human conversion of energy into mass. So we call it compatibilism. What we do, compatibilism. We look for reciprocity in exchanges and compatibilism between the sexes and classes. Okay, the problem we have is that that we're facing today is that as individuals we have common interests as parents in a family. We all run small businesses. But as individuals, in the absence of parental responsibility, what bias are we fulfilling? We're moving to an extreme, and we're not creating compromises with others, increasing the mass, or basically the surface area, or the capital of the society. So basically we're fragmenting. You see this everywhere. Everybody thought, well, males, if we make equality, men and women will converge. No, it happened the opposite. By creating the more equal civilizations, the men and women diverge more into their sexual biases. So we went from 1 vote per family with responsibility for productivity to 1 vote for individual without responsible for productivity. And we allowed people in here who are like, well, we don't want any responsibility at all. We want everybody to give us stuff. So we've produced, we could have produced an additional house for labor, an additional house for women, and we could have maintained the market for the discovery of the production of commons between the classes and sexes. So there are only 3 means of influence: the male violence, libertarian ascendant male remuneration, and female seduction. I'm getting close to the end here. There's the 3 means of coercion: masculine force, neutral exchange, feminine undermining is the negative, right? So you can, I can punish you, I can boycott you, I can undermine you. So it's physical, military, economic, and social. And you end up with those 3 means of coercion, produce 3 institutions and 3 elites. You get the law in the sense of contract law, the common law. You get force in the state, or you get religion. And then you get the exercise of power, and those elites sort into factions and produce the institutions. And this is the one I did back in 2012. It hasn't changed. It shows the details of how this ternary relationship ends up, and why the West is specifically different is that because we went for sovereignty, there's a prohibition on authority. We never got one of these things to be dominant. What happened was we maintained the chieftains, right, or the warriors as a vote. We maintained the judges, the law keepers, the lawgivers as a vote, and we retained the faith as a vote. And so that's why we have trifunctionalism. So one of the reasons we've evolved faster than other civilizations is combined is because the simplicity of authority actually eradicates the opportunity for computation. And so what we've produced is a competition between elites, and our division of our government is the maximum example of that, a competition between the elites, such that we don't have anybody able to impose enough authority, and we have to always seek evolutionary computation of reconciliation of differences, which is breaking down now because the left wants to destroy that law and that trifunctionalism by creating authority. The next thing that happens is civilizational differences. If you start with, you only have 3 to start with because you only have 3 major ways of conversion. Which one you start with is strongest, the next one is weakest, and the third one is very weak or fails. So if you look at the military, you can start with military, then go to law, then state, then religion. That failed, what failed in Europe was religion. We developed philosophy. We didn't develop a strong church. If we started with the military, the state, the law, and religion, there's no living example, even though Europe appears to be trying. Has never survived. If you go to military, then the state, then the religion, then the law fails in China, and you get their centralized state. If you start with the military and then religion, you end up with a weak state and no law at all, which is India. If you start out with the religion, a failed state, and a failed law, you end up with Islam, which is monopoly of religion. If you fail with your military, get law, you fail at law, and you fail the state, you get the diasporic cultures. If you fail at the military, fail at religion, fail at state, and fail at law, you get gypsies. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is called path dependency. And so there are only three means of coercion, three types of elites, three institutions, three foundational institutions, and the order in which you develop and becomes as evolutionary, as deterministic as some genetic change. So you can, and the problem is it's really hard to change this. It's almost impossible. Almost nobody ever has. So this is why there's a conflict between civilizations, is because these differences aren't reconcilable. So what I've tried to go over is there's this ternary logic, negative, positive mass, right? Ternary logic, evolution, computation, sex differences and evolutionary reproduction, the ternary logic of the moral biases, the three personality axes, the three means of persuasion, the three categories of elites, the three primary institutions, and the path dependency of civilizational differences. Where does it all begin? Sex. That's the evolution of everything. All human differences. So this is the whole, see, everything I've got to is so I can say the slide. This was actually the purpose of my presentation, is this one slide. All right, and so we had a timeline in aristocracy in Greece. And it was, so we in the Middle East, they developed religion first. You probably know this because Göbekli Tepe and shit around there. They developed religion first. They developed the most seditious, awful form of religion. I won't go into that, but they developed religion first. And that's because the priests would tell people the solar cycles so that they would know when to plant along the river valleys, because it's the great river valleys is what makes the Middle East. That's where all the food is. It's concentrated food. And so they developed priests first, and then they only developed aristocracy and military once that these territories that needed integration started overlapping with each other and causing conflict. That's when aristocracy came in being. So they started out where religion got aristocracy and never developed law. So you have the feudalism, which is post-Greece and Rome. Then you have the Hanseatic League restores trade, this time in the north instead of the Mediterranean. You had the British invention of the modern rule of law state because of it, because that's what trade brings. Then we had the Enlightenment, which is the middle class, the rise of the middle class. And then they came in and they tried to displace the aristocracy. But what succeeded is where they added them. They added, they didn't delete. Right, so we had the Enlightenment, the English law and empiricism, France moral philosophy, German rational philosophy. That shit's nuts. I mean, this is evil, but that's nuts. All right, we got law and empiricism. I'm sorry. I love Germans, okay? But I got to tell you, Kant and Hegel, there's something wrong with those guys. All right. The sequence of revolutions in sale, agrarian, commercial, financial, and industrial, that created extraordinary rise of the middle class. So what happened to the aristocracy with the rise of the middle class? Conflict and disruption. Well, then we had the Industrial Revolution, which is the Marxist sequence in labor, culture, truth, sex, family, race, and the anti-masculine, the anti-aristocratic, the truth before it. They were against everything. Then we added women in 1922, where we got the 60s, 70s, and 90s, enfranchisement, entrance into the workforce, the abortion pill, reproduction, marriage, family, dating, and sex, and the collapse of our intersexual dependencies. Then we had the Western immigrants, with non-Western immigrants in '68 with the Civil Rights Movement, and the whole point was, of course, to undermine as well. And we had the mainstream woke today, which is the Clinton, then Obama. Obama is where we got the white replacement to really take hold. And then we've had the collapse in media from that time period. So the point I want to make here is every time we add a new class, we go through a crisis. Right? So, and how long does it take for the crisis to play out? How long does it take for this to play out? How long does it take for that to play out? 600 years? Right? How long did that take out? Well, it's almost done, but it took us 100 years. Right? How long is this taking to play out? Well, the past 70 years is not very friendly. This certainly hasn't helped any, and this is just since when Obama got in, I knew it was over because he brought in they're the people that started counting down white replacement.
Speeding up.
What?
It's speeding up.
Correct, because they're closer to the end. That's why the Clinton defeat was so surprise for them, because they thought they'd won. So it's, I I didn't, so I'm trying to get, I want to get through, I'm trying to rush. The evolution of law against male antisocial behavior has been disciplined. Law evolves through trial and error, just like science evolves through trial and error. What we do is we discover something going bad, we define it happens repeated times, we adjudicate to stop it, and then we legislate to institutionalize it, right? But men were liberated first. I mean, one of the things about European colonialism, it wasn't governments that did it. Who did it? Us guys. Colonialism was done by privateers, people, entrepreneurs. And then they called upon the states to defend them. So how law evolves? Well, law evolved by that means pretty successfully until the positive law movement happened. It was a bunch of Jewish authors, Hart, Dworkin, I'm trying to get remember them, Rez, Kelsen, Hart, Dworkin, and they tried to bring in Jewish and French positive law into Anglo common law. And so this is where we got legal activism in the 60s that tried to use the courts, which is what the courts are doing now, right? The courts are doing things you don't like. It's because they're saying no more of this, you got to go through the legislature, don't go through the legislature, it's not happening. So our law hasn't evolved because there are holes in our Constitution that specifically specifically license the capacity for the feminine means of warfare against us, right? We used to have it in our common law. Shrilling, being a Karen used to be illegal. Shrilling used to be illegal. Gossiping, shaming, rallying used to be illegal. You get punished for it, putting stocks, that kind of stuff. They actually they got men to police women first, and then women started policing women, so women would be not subject as a collective to the problems against it. So we've had a long period. We have 800 years of suppression of the male, and I think you've probably read the what's his name? Think of the name. The genetic classification of Europe by aggressive hanging. Right? We know about this from 1200 onward. We're hanging people by the truckload. So if you committed a crime, we didn't cut off your hands, we just hung you, got the problem over with. So as genetic classification worked. What?
Everything from loitering on up.
It doesn't matter. Hanging was a good way of getting you out of good society. I don't think I'm going to. So I said every time we lift a group up, we go through this, right? So the basic problem is that the key word which we push on is, other than truth, we have responsibility, sex, class, culture, civilization, differences, perceived responsibility, and the capacity for that responsibility. So we've also seen because we've seen in the moral differences, the political differences, we've seen in the cognitive differences and the behavioral differences, we've seen that it comes down to what do you consider property that you're responsible for. And so if you have some people in your population that consider the only property they're responsible for is the emotions of themselves and others, that property is something that they will concern themselves with and consider everything else not property. Whereas some of us consider every one of those assets, from information to informal institutions, to formal institutions, to norms, traditions, values, and whatever is capital, we will defend that capital because that's what we have demonstrated an interest in. So the problem is there difference in overcoming those costs. That we have individual differences in capacity for costs. Western civilization is the most costly emotionally and psychologically of all. The perceived asymmetry of the returns on those costs, right? So if I have to work really hard to suppress my emotions and my greed, my whatever, right? And I can't weaponize social warfare to commit antisocial behavior to undermine others in order to get what I want, I'm going to resist that very hard, right? I'm going to resist that. It's not like the left is going to accept being told no more lies. Because they justify lies by claiming oppression. Are they oppressed? No, they're domesticated. It's called domestication syndrome. It's the single evolutionary direction of mankind. So it's perceived, because of that, they're perceiving an asymmetry of the returns on those costs, and then they use the feminine means of avoiding those costs. So it's a normal process. We're going through a normal consequence, the delay between the removal of constraints on a group and their elevation of that group into agency. It's solvable if you know what the problem is, how to solve it, but you need to know what we just talked about for the past, hour. How long have I been going? You have to know that in order to know how to outlaw it using the law, because the law is about property. So you have to be able to turn it into property and describe it that in order to solve the problem. But once you understand that female antisocial behavior is just like male antisocial behavior, it's just expressed as social destruction rather than physical capital destruction. It's just the same thing. But you need to understand it as, you need to understand what we've talked about in order to get to the point where you say, okay, it's solvable, we know how to solve it, and there's only 8 holes in the Constitution we have to patch. Right? And that's what I was surprised by. There's 8 holes. I patch those 8 holes, we do it the way we've described it, and then we equally suppress it, and we'll never have this problem again. It'll meet resistance. Know what group will willingly give up their crimes when they've justified them. And the problem is, it's harder to resist the feminine impulse from the male because we kill each other. And women undermine each other, and so it's more accepted among women to continue this undermining. This is, I won't go into this now because I think I've made my point. I only wanted to make that other one, but I do want to show that we've done the research on how the feminine intuition is weaponized and scaled. How we go from storytelling to sophistry, how we escalate from sophistry to undermining. I think do we have GSSRM in there? Yes. So we have the escalation path here. And we have how that warfare is conducted from within and how they undermine by delay and deceive from within, storytelling in particular. And this is the last important slide, which is showing the female method of warfare: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Marxism, neoconservative, libertarianism, neo-Marxism, postmodernism, political correctness, woke. And if you say, well, what does that evolution mean? It's the same freaking technique every single time. It's the same exact thing every single time. So the hard question is, why does it work? What the hell is wrong with these men? Okay, I'm asking the women here. See if
what was the question?
What's wrong with men that we're such suckers?
Same trick 7-10 times in a row.
Well, how does this happen? And so I actually don't know the answer.
Don't those tricks kind of nurse you out of infancy and childhood because you're kind of, as a mother, leading children along?
That's correct.
Through manipulation?
Yes. Well, I mean, but the mothers need to manipulate. It works.
That's why it works.
Right. But the problem is you can't let it go outside of its domain. So, I did this. I don't know when I did this chart, like 2014 or something, and I'm still surprised at how easy it is to understand when you look at it in this form. So the history is simple. The origin of the behavior is this female suppression of alphas in order to get control of their reproduction. So it used to be like apes, the big SOB. I can't remember what book that covers this, but the big SOB goes in and he's like getting all the women, right? Because he can force himself on everybody and the guys can't resist. But the minute we had tools and pointy objects, that meant 2 guys could kill you in a heartbeat, or 1 guy could kill you while you're sleeping. So that went away, the ability to do that. So females brought about the first political revolution that led to the opportunity for domestication syndrome to take place. Right, and the compromise between the sexes, the relative equality of sexes, the continuous estrus cycle, and everything else that resulted. So that was that a good revolution for mankind? All right, so the basic strategy of raising children and controlling alpha male capture of the reproduction, that was a good thing. Right. What about when the Middle East did it as a revolt against the Indo-Europeans? The Persians and the Europeans, we're the same. We're all the result of the Indo-European revolution. So, but the problem is we use this thing called reason. So in the age of transformation, as was the origin of all religions, the origin of every religion in modernism. After the Bronze Age collapse, we get the Age of Transformation, where all people are starting to come together. I love that my friend Rudyard Lynch has gone out and explained this. He says, think of it this way. The Greeks invented money. Now, before money, everything you and I do is a personal relationship. I owe you something, you owe me something. But the minute I have money, what happens? Depersonalization. The Marxist alienation begins, right, with the invention of money. One of the reasons I love Rudyard is he finds these ways of describing things that are very easy to get across. So we got that revolt against the Indo-Europeans. Then we got the revolt against Greece and Rome, which was they killed the great civilization. So Islam killed North African civilization, Egyptian civilization, Mediterranean civilization, Levantine civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Persian civilization, Anatolian civilization, and they did a good job on Southeast Europe. All right. And so the death of these civilizations came from this revolt. Then next we get the Marxist sequence, which is a revolt against the aristocratic Europeans. You see the pattern here? Alphas, aristocracy, aristocratic. The Marxist sequence against aristocratic Europe. The death of the great civilizations is the objective. And the whole question is, are we going to have another dark age, or is Europe going to become the final civilization other than China to fall to the disease of Islam? So I had a job today. It was overcoming the taboo of the pathological feminine, accepting that it's a normal process for human history. We should expect it. It's rational. It's logical. People aren't evil. It's a natural thing that all human beings do when they're raised from one position of advantage to another. We recognize that we adapt our law, recognize that since cognitively feminine resists constraint more than cognitively masculine, especially psychological, and hide behind the false claims of oppression and victimhood as a means of evading responsibility, that we're going to continue to get resistance. But we have to understand that truth is enough. We have the knowledge. You put truth and we fix the law, and we can bring it about. The rest of the presentations, hopefully, we'll continue on this to continue to fill out this message. So I talked way longer than I wanted, way longer than anybody wanted me to. Anyway, hopefully I got the point across. Anything else? Questions? Can I go? Yes, sir.
Thank you. To what extent is that Marxist pattern have the goal of the destruction of civilization or like aristocracy or masculine order versus the result of living in time and then not being aware of the unconscious goal as a result?
I'm an intellectual. I'm the equivalent of Marxist intellectual for the West, right? All right, so I'm an anti-Marx. Think of it that way. And so there are guys like me on their side that do what I do, and they believe they're right. And there are people like me on our side that are doing what I do, and we believe we're right. The thing is that those people know they're doing wrong to get their right. If you look at what we're doing, we're saying we will get what's right without doing wrong. And so that's the big difference. And there's no evidence that they haven't always been wrong. All right? And the opposite is, the evidence is they've always been wrong. They're wrong repeatedly. The only question is why we haven't developed a science and logic of never allowing this to happen again. So that's what I view my job as. Make it a science and a law that never gets happening again, and the rest of us are all fleshing out everything dependent across the family, the individual, the marriage, the intersexual relations, the whole thing. We're trying to cover the whole spectrum so that one thing can be brought into being. But the way you engineer society is with law. It's the only thing that you can do to engineer society. A lot of people think in really silly amateurish terms. It makes me nuts. Well, if we just believed, or we just valued. How insane is that? Right? Nobody's going to believe or value something that's not in their interest. The people are going to pursue their incentives. So we have to alter incentives so they cannot pursue negative incentives. Did I answer your question? Yes. All right. I've been up here too long, but I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. Okay, we're done. Thank you. And I apologize. This man is a saint, right? This organization runs because of this man. And so I have been late with my presentation. I have been gone over every time he's had me give his presentation. It's not because he doesn't try. It's because that I'm a very stubborn rock, and it doesn't move very well. All right. So thank you all. Love everyone here. I'm so proud of all of you and our organization. Thanks very much.